Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms, and of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Hi, Mae. Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining.
Hi, thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
And you're calling in today from your home in New York City, right?
Yes, in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn. And you grew up in Hell's Kitchen? Is that what I've read?
Yeah, in the city. I didn't go too far. Just like switched boroughs to somewhere where I can have a yard and a little bit more space.
Good.
Yeah.
And you spent a little time in Utah, which I thought was interesting. Was that, I think you said, was that like a boarding situation?
Yeah, unfortunately. I got shipped to one of those like troubled teen centers. I feel like there's more about it online now, like with Paris Hilton's documentary, and I think Netflix put out a recent one as well that I've been meaning to watch. But yeah, at the time it was definitely not as well known of a thing.
So Colorado to me is like the beautiful West, and then Utah is also beautiful, but it's like a different planet.
Yes, no, I love.
But I'm sure you probably didn't see much of it though, right?
No, just like the little section that we were at, and then we did go on a Moab trip, so I got to see Moab. I've been back since.
Oh, cool.
I love Colorado; it's gorgeous. And I've been back in Utah to like travel, and I saw some of the parks in the South, and definitely agree. There's one very specific place that I think of when I think of Utah looking like a different planet, and it's like this. It's like locally called Moon Landing Road in southern Utah, and it just like looks like you're on the moon when you get to the end of this like crazy like 8-mile road. And I show people photos of it all the time. I'm like, look at this.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's different than Hell's Kitchen, obviously. No, that's great. And you've been sort of dripping out the individual singles for the last few months, right?
Yeah, Apollo song.
How long have you been working on the album?
I wrote the first song for the album, which was also coincidentally the first single, in like November of 2022. And then I started recording the album in like June of 2023. So it wasn't a super long writing process, all things considered. But I also, after Apollo song was written in late 2022, kind of very purposefully and intentionally was like, I'm gonna write a record. Like I want to put out a full-length LP, and that's what I want to write with that all in mind. And so I think that like being that intentional was what allowed the writing to kind of come in what to me felt like a shorter time frame. I mean, I know some people write an album in 2 weeks, but that would not be me otherwise. And then we did the recording over the summer of last year and started like dropping out the singles, and late September was the first one. So it's been it'll be like September, like late September through late April as like an album cycle, which I don't know how many months that is, but a handful.
All right. No, that's good. So I came across your stuff. I'm a big follower of this playlist on YouTube called Indie Folk Central.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where they play so much great music. And I'll look at the screen when it's on the television, and I'll pick up the artist and I'll look them up on Spotify or whatever. And yours was just distinct among all the other sounds. It's just like this soft, delicate sort of. It's like what I envision the perfect music to be on a. Don't take this the wrong way, but like a rainy, cloudy day, like at a coffee shop,
Yes, no, that is the best compliment. I'm like, what do you mean take it the wrong way? I love that. Thank you.
So anyway, I was like, okay, she seems really interesting. She seems interesting. And so I started following you and obviously listening. And so anyway, that's how I came across your stuff, I guess. And I think in another interview you've talked about just the whole process of being an independent artist and getting your name out there, that it's a complete numbers game, and the hustle that it requires to basically just cold call and cold email and cold DM probably all these playlist curators. And I don't know if you did that with Indie Folk Central, but whatever, that worked. However they found you out, it worked for me.
Love that.
But yeah, talk about Talk about that. Like, is that something you signed up for when you got into this, or has that been kind of a surprise on what that process looks like to get your name out there?
So yeah, I love Indie Folk Central. I listen to their compilations as well. And I think I just submitted through like their site. And Rufus was kind enough
Okay.
to like the songs and want to add some of them, which is great. And I've done like two of their like compilation albums on Spotify now as well, which has been really cool. The promotion aspect and the way of going about it is definitely something that I feel like is constantly evolving and something that I'm learning what works and what doesn't and what's worth putting your time into and what isn't, because a lot of playlists, like there's a value in everything, but a lot of playlists specifically on like Spotify, which is a big focus that people put on, kind of only yields like a passive listenership. And I think that can be great depending on what your genre of music is and your choice and your goals, but that doesn't feel as valuable to me the more I kind of try to choose and internalize like what do I want in my career, what do I want in making music. And a passive listener base that like doesn't really care about the lyrics or have much of a connection to anything past the sound of the song isn't really what I'm going for. So if I only have a limited amount of time to spend promoting in a certain way, like that over time has been less and less the direction that I've been going. And I think that Indie Folk Central specifically is one of those exceptions where sure they have a good listenership on Spotify, but they make these compilations on YouTube where people actually pay attention to the songs and they ask you to send a
Right.
little blurb about the song. And I think it's a cool in between, like a cross of this is still a way to reach people, but it's also a way to reach people who might actually care to then follow along with you as an artist rather than just like a playlist that someone shuffles and doesn't look at.
Right. Well, I started this podcast just a few months ago, and I've talked to a fair number of people since. It's not surprising, I guess, but one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten is, obviously everybody wants, tens of millions of streams and, to headline all these big shows and all that. Or like most people, like that would be the goal. But actually, a lot of these independent artists that I've talked to, they're completely happy and satisfied with the loyal fan base, like you were talking about, like the loyal fan base that will go and see them or host them at a house show, or go and watch them in a listening room, that actually want to like have a relationship with them as much as you can, virtually, or like a fan and artist should. That's healthy and normal. They actually prefer that, as long as obviously they can make a living and pay the bills and do what they love to do. Which I was kind of surprised because I thought every artist the end goal would be to I don't know, be headline the big show, like I said. Is that where your head's at?
I think so, for sure. Like that's very much where I've developed to over time. But I also think that different artists' fan bases are just a different vibe. I went to the Zach Bryan show a couple nights ago in Brooklyn. I love him. I love his recent self-titled album. It's so good. And his fan base is so attentive, in a way that I feel like shows that size typically aren't. And there's a couple
Yeah, that's a
select
good point.
artists that I feel like I've seen live at different sizes, like maybe bigger than like a club show, but not as big as an arena. And it's kind of, a lot of them are like some of my current favorite artists that I'm so attentive to, that
Yeah.
the overall fan base is very engaged and attentive. And so I think in an ideal world, like you can headline the big show and also have your fan base be the type that is attentive and cares. But I think that usually requires a really slow come up rather than a really fast overnight in big quotes. But the like kind of new age like overnight success or whatever, where like a song does really well on TikTok or like on Reels or somewhere else, and suddenly everybody knows this one song of yours, I don't think that necessarily translates to a dedicated fan base a lot of the time, because they're dedicated to one single song they came across recently. So when there's been a handful of different moments of that success that kind of jumps up over time, and I think that's what you see with these artists that are bigger but have that really dedicated fan base, I think that's what creates the cross in between the two. And it's a lot of luck, and it's a lot of talent, and it's a lot of dedication, and a lot of great songs. I feel like that are required for that. But that's the ideal to me. is getting to a point where I can obviously make a living doing this, but can also play the big shows and have people come and be really dedicated. And I think it also gives you a lot of power as a large artist as well when your fan base is that dedicated to like put the spotlight on new artists, because if your fans are that dedicated to you, they're also going to be dedicated to someone that you bring on to open the show, and that also is like a really big power to hold in your hands, I would imagine, as like a big artist like that.
Yeah, and speaking of that, aren't you going to open for Harrison Storm?
Yes, yeah, I'm so excited.
Later in April?
Yeah, on the 24th in New York at Mercury Lounge, my favorite venue. It's my favorite small New York venue.
So he's pretty big. I think he's got like 1 million monthly listeners or something like that.
Yeah, I was like kind of, I think, in shock because I had heard of him before, and I think I had like 1 or 2 of his songs saved. But I didn't realize like how big of a following he actually had. I think because he's Australian. So like for him to have the reach he has in the US and be from a different country, I would imagine the numbers have to be that big, because he probably had to build up a fan base in Australia first before getting over to like another country's reach. But I'm very excited. I've heard really good things about his live show, and all the videos I've seen have looked really cool. So I'm stoked to open and then be able to watch it.
No, that's great. So back to the point you were making about the Zach Bryan example. So obviously you're going to learn a lot, right? Once this album comes out, about the process, and I'm sure you'll make mistakes and respond and react and adjust. But at this point, what are the 2 or 3 things that you're like, okay, for me to sort of build that slow roll, and that loyalty? What are the 2 or 3 things that you're like, I'm gonna have to do like this year to do that?
Write good songs. That's definitely important.
Yeah.
I think continuing to like foster the relationships that I have with the fans that already exist, and being aware of how sacred and special that is, because I think that that's something that people can lose sight of often. And when a fan,
what are some tangible examples of that?
like there was a girl who I met, I want to say she lives in Chicago, who had me draw something for her to get tattooed, and then I got a message like 2 or 3 months later with a picture of something that I drew, like tattooed on her ankle. Or the tour that I was on last year, opening for Ethan Jewell, who is like a great friend of mine and the most wonderful musician in person ever. His fan base is so dedicated and so attentive. There were some fans who came to the shows that hadn't either known my music before or like found out about it from the tour announcement, and they brought little bracelets they handmade with like their favorite songs on them, or like a lyric as like a gift. And you're like, you care, like you really care about this. And to be then aware of that person, and like there's certain kids that like they'll comment on like something on my Instagram, and I'm like, I know who you are, like I know which city you're in, I know which venue I met you at, I remember this, I remember you brought your dad and he was wearing this flannel shirt, or like this other thing. And they really appreciate that you look at them as real people, because they are. But I think that that's an experience that as a fan you don't get very often. Like I can kind of feel that from my end when I'm a fan of someone as well. Like I just feel like a number in a room so much of the time, and you're not, that you're the only reason that someone can make a living. And so to make sure that people are aware that you appreciate what they do for you, even if that's just like posting on their Instagram story or sending it to their friend, like that makes a big difference too. Even at a bigger artist level, it still makes a big difference. I found artists with hundreds of thousands of streams that I hadn't heard of before because someone I know posted a song and I was like, wait, this is really, really good. And then became a fan of them. Or like it was on someone's playlist in the car and I like saved it. So any sort of sharing music in like a real tangible way, I think has just as much, if not more value than like, the stuff that people expect is supposed to be helpful.
Right. Okay. So write good songs, do the little things with fans, that kind of build that camaraderie. What else?
Probably try to reach more of them. The internet I struggle with that a lot. Just from a time perspective, I think. Like I have a full-time job. I have dogs and a life to keep up with, and I have one of my roommates who's a really good friend of mine has been helping with the PR for the album, so like they've written like the press releases and sent out some stuff to people, and one of my best friends makes those collages that we put on Instagram like when we post the stories and stuff. But in the general sense, like I I do all of it myself. Like, I'm laying in bed at night instead of going to bed, sending emails to people about opening shows that I see announced, or I'm like sending these DMs or doing these things or responding to this thing, and I'm constantly exhausted. And so to find time to then film and make videos to be able to be as consistent as you have to be on a lot of these platforms is really tough, but I know it's like a necessary thing, so I've been trying to be better about it and readjust my kind of commitments to make more time for it. I think that's definitely something I want to be doing more.
Well, I think I have an idea, but give us a sense of like the numbers involved with those emails. Like, are we talking like a few dozen over the course of a month, or is it hundreds and hundreds?
I feel like it's more in the lower end, because it's as you like find stuff. It's not all at once. It's like, oh, this tour was just announced and there's no opener, and the rooms are a size that like I could like make a pretty sufficient help with my draw. Like, if the rooms are like 200 and I know I can draw 30 to 40 people in each city on this show, like this tour, it's worth shooting an email over to management and being like, hey, if you don't have someone confirmed, like, consider. And I've gotten a handful of like local opening slots through doing that. It's surprisingly effective. I didn't really expect that at all. But it's more like just constantly checking like venue websites and like just seeing what comes up on your socials to see, because as much as the internet is a really powerful tool for reaching people, I really have found the most success in opening slots. I think that's like a very classic thing that people like undervalue now, but if the fan base that you're playing to is dedicated and they trust the artist that they're coming to see enough to bring them to someone new, then they come in with a really like open like perspective of like, maybe this person is going to be someone that I'm going to really enjoy. And, you know, people come and they buy your merch and they come talk to you, and you then see them starting to like your posts and following you on socials, and there's a really tangible growth from that, if you're the type of artist that can harness it. Because I think that there's a certain genre and like vibe and way of performing and stage banter that benefits you a lot more in those situations than others.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So I think on another interview too, this was a couple years ago, you were sort of, well, I don't know if debating is the right term, but you were saying, listen, I'm in New York. I grew up here. Apart from my little stint in Utah, you know, I'm been here my whole life, and I think you indicated, like, listen, I want to go to Nashville, right? So is that something that is still top of mind? Did you try to do that at any point since then? And then, sort of a follow-up question is, what's it like being an independent artist in New York? Is it? Because I live in Atlanta, and you know, I see what that's like, and I'm just wondering, you know, is the big city all that it's cracked up to be, or is it like a lot harder than it sounds?
You really dug a couple years ago. God. Nashville, I wanted to move to Nashville before the pandemic. I was planning on moving down there, and then COVID hit, and so like everything changed, and by the time that things were kind of starting to go back to normal, my life was really vastly different than it was before. I think the biggest thing that stopped me from moving down to Nashville, honestly, was I work in the service industry, and to make enough money to be able to exist and fund music, I'd probably have to bartend down there, and as a sober person, I really don't want to exclusively bartend. Like, I work as a server and a bartender now. I do both at the restaurants I work at, and I think I would hate having to bartend exclusively, and knowing that the cost of living is pretty high. Like, it was just like a technical adult decision to like not move down there, unfortunately. But I have friends down there, and I enjoy it when I visit. I don't know if it necessarily would be the right fit for me now, looking back. I write everything. I release pretty much on my own. There's one song on my album that my little sister and I wrote together, and that's it. And Nashville is super collaborative, and I think that's wonderful, but for my own project, I don't think it would do me justice in like a writing way. And I just don't think it's the right fit, and that's okay. I'm very dead set on leaving New York. Not for necessarily anywhere specific, just leaving. And I think it's the music scene and the way that everything is in New York, and I'd like to imagine other big cities, but I don't know, because I only know what it's like here. everything changes so often. You know, like I walked by the block that I grew up on today, and like half the businesses that I remember being there a couple of years ago aren't there anymore. And like even the really famous one across the street that was like a big like thing, like it closed down while I was living there as a kid. And neighborhoods change, and I think the music scene is affected by that just like everything else. I think that the music scene in New York really thrives in kind of a weird way in like the high school and college scene. When I was in high school, I used to go to all these great shows in people's like yards and like places farther into Brooklyn and in Rockaway Beach, and it was so much fun. And I didn't play music at the time. I wish I had. I think I would have had a really great time. But I loved going to these shows, and I had such a like amazing experience doing that. And then I can't speak to college. I didn't go to school, but I know that a lot of kids who go to like a lot of the like NYU and kind of like music programs say that they really enjoy that. I think that it's not a very friendly music scene, and there's a lot of things you could blame that on. I feel like I end up kind of settling on the thought that people think of New York as this very individualized place and this individualized culture of like, I come here to like hustle and get what I want and grow and whatever. And I think that that's a very like outsider perspective to have. Like as someone who grew up here, that's never been my experience of New York until I started hanging around transplants. And I think that that really seeps its way into everything, music scene included. And it's really tough to meet people that are just kind and want to make music and want to be around you because they like what you're doing and not because of numbers or aren't looking for all this underlying stuff. And my closest collaborator, my producer Jacob Leventhal, is also from New York. Just like we didn't meet like as kids or anything. Like I'm sure we've crossed paths because the world here is so small, but he also grew up here, and a lot of his friends that are musicians also grew up here. And it's a lot of these like people who are still trying to foster community in a way that's really special, but in a place where it seems to be very difficult. I really struggle with it. I'm constantly looking to meet more musicians, and I find that I have more musician friends spread around the U.S. than I do here, even though I meet more people here than I do other places.
Well, in terms of like wanting to be the musician and the artist that you want to be, do you think it's advantageous to you that you're not part of Nashville or Austin, you know, or whatever, and that you are in New York, or do you think you've got more work to do to sort of get out there and meet the right people?
I think that it's, for me, and maybe this will change, or maybe this is an incorrect perspective, but what I feel like I'm missing the most is time, and that time can be bought by a lower cost of living or by I don't know, someone who wants to give me money, like, but more realistically, by having more time to like put into learning how to play my instrument better and picking up, like my girlfriend got me a banjo for my birthday. I really want to like start properly playing it, and I really want to play mandolin and kind of spend time really focusing in on a lot of these things that I'd really like to do that I think will make me a better musician and a better writer and a better artist. And the issue that I run into is just I have to work a certain amount of hours to afford to live, and I have to work a certain amount of additional hours to afford to be able to record and make music on top of it. And doing all of that doesn't leave that much time to be a musician, unfortunately. And it's a constant struggle that I go through, a constant crisis that I have. I don't really think that being somewhere else will help. I think it might hurt it just in a technical way. Like my experiences in restaurants, New York restaurants have a really high ceiling of where you can go. And I've been in the industry for a handful of years now, and I just keep kind of like inching my way up. And as I do that, I buy myself a little bit more time. Like where I worked right before COVID, I had to make the amount I would have needed to live. I would have had less time than I do now.
Got it.
And so I feel like if anything, I would feel more isolated somewhere where there was more to do, because I'd feel like I'd be able to do even less of it. You know, like there's so many shows going on in Nashville and so many places to go and so many people to meet, and that's so cool. I feel like I enjoy it more when I visit, because I can visit and put my head 100% in that mindset, because when I'm a visitor, that's what I am. I'm not working as a server. I'm not making a living. I'm on there as a visitor for like a week. or two. So I can spend that time like really involved in the local scene. Whereas I think if I lived there and I had to keep up with all these other pieces, I probably would end up doing less than I would like to. And that would maybe end up more isolating. But that's all from an outside perspective. I don't know what it would actually be like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if it wasn't New York, where would you want to be right now?
Honestly, I want to be in some sort of vehicle in the middle of nowhere.
Oh wow, there you go.
I want an RV or like a school bus or something. I lived in a rooftop tent with Apollo for 3.5 months on top of my car, and had the most amazing time ever. And that's when I started writing the album originally.
Okay.
I feel I don't own a lot of things. I need very little like to be happy. I feel like I own more guitars than I own anything else. But that's my like ideal scenario. Yeah, and now a banjo, you're right, and hopefully a mandolin soon.
And now a banjo, yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to have some sort of home base that can travel, where I can move around and I can see places or be places in kind of like a slow travel way, where I can integrate into a local scene and spend time somewhere, but not have to like so heavily commit to being there that if I end up unhappy I can't leave. I have a lot of like commitment issues in that way. I think not really. I didn't go to school, so I didn't leave New York for college. I've never really had like a temporary like leave from where I'm from, like by my own choice. And I think that that's created a lot of fear of like committing to somewhere new and then being unhappy and then having to figure out a way to leave. And so instead I'm like, well, how can I cross in the middle and go places without being trapped to them? And there's so many like seasonal jobs and things that you can do. So that's kind of my short-term, long-term plan. Ideally by next year I can get out of here.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, so here's the great thing about music, right? I'm almost 50. I'm a male, almost 50, lives in the South, and I feel connected to you, who is, probably in her 20s, I would imagine still. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm 25 now.
Female in her 20s that lives in New York. I'm a Christian. I think you're Jewish.
I am Jewish, yeah.
Right? So the opposites, there's a lot of opposites going on, right? But the music, I feel connected to you, right? And I think that's the brilliance of music in general, but like especially the music that I've heard from you. So that's awesome, and I think the songs that I've heard off the new album are great, and so that's what I want to jump into now. Yeah. I guess the new album's called I Think, parentheses, I Might Be Grown.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of hesitation there.
Yes.
Is that intentional?
Yes, 100%, for sure.
What's the genesis of that? Like that title.
Yeah, the title is the closing lyric of the album from the song Grown. I like the idea of titling the record something that wasn't necessarily a track name, but kind of referenced one that was more of like a lyric situation. And after kind of going through and getting a handful of options, I landed in that direction. Grown is one of my, if not my favorite song on the album, but I think that a lot of this album and really the overall concept of it is this idea of growing up when you didn't plan to or you didn't think you would, and you just weren't really prepared for any of it, and how that feels, because the experiences of growing up and that kind of like coming of age are similar but different for everyone, but the ages at which you experience them can be vastly different, and that can be for a lot of different reasons. And I know that, like, at 25, I'm not grown up. I know I would like to hope that I'm going to keep growing and changing and that this isn't necessarily where I'm going to land forever. I'd like to believe that. But there's also that piece of, like, well, I'm not a kid anymore, and I am settled into some sort of adulthood, and that's something that I never really thought I would have. It's like that piece of, like, living longer than you ever thought you would, and then somehow having more time makes you feel like you don't have enough because suddenly your life is big and you want more time than you ever thought you had. And it's this constant like back and forth feeling, but having the album title land on like, I don't think I'm grown. I don't think that naming the album Grown would have done it justice. I don't think that the album is a solid and full thought through, like, thought in that way. I think that having it hesitate a little bit is what makes it feel right and what makes it feel like it fits, kind of.
Okay. No, that's cool. I'm 50. I don't think I'm grown
There you
yet,
go. See?
for what it's worth. So
My mom says that all the time. She's like, I'm 62
Yeah.
and I'm still growing. I'm still changing all the time. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, yeah, you are.
no, it's great. And so like on Instagram, and I encourage everybody to follow you on Instagram. You've started to not only sprinkle some of the singles out into the universe, but you're releasing these little excerpts and little, I don't know what they're called, but like little commentary, if that's fair, on some of the songs. And so I want to read, you did this about a week or so ago. You titled it To Begin. And it's sort of like this notion of, beginning stages of a healthy process. You talk about like a messy start, and then you say that the sentiment of having to forgive your younger self for actions that ended up hurting you deeply as you grew up always seemed difficult for me, and it still is, right? So talk to us about that.
Yeah, To Begin is track 2 off the album. So what I've been doing is, as I've been putting out the singles, I did these little like collages that Caro, my friend, made with like the storyline of the songs. And then now that we had like a certain amount of time left between the last single we put out and the album, we've been putting out these little explanations of the remaining songs that aren't singles to kind of give an opportunity to have like the narrative of those. So like I have one on my desktop that I need to write and post for tomorrow. And To Begin is, I wrote it in like February of 2023. So it was kind of like in the middle process of writing the album. And it kind of became like the opening. So there's the intro track, which is Garden 2, and then To Begin kind of is the opening of the album. And like you mentioned, like it's meant to be the kind of like uncomfortable, messy start of both the project and the storyline that we're kind of coming into. I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger. I think it's a product of struggling really deeply, having a little bit too much access to freedom, living in a big city where there's everything around you all the time, and also just not really thinking that I would ever have to live with or experience the consequences that would come from my own actions. Like I just didn't really think I would stick around very long, and so I just never thought that I would have to internally deal with any of what I was putting myself through. And so To Begin to me feels like kind of a way of acknowledging other people did things to hurt me, but I put myself in the situations for those things to be done. And now I'm distanced from that and I'm no longer doing those things, but I still have all of these fears and anxieties and leftover pain from stuff that I put myself in. And how do you forgive yourself and move on? And if you can't, can you at least ask yourself to start doing it? And so that's kind of what To Begin is. It's saying like the lyric, and there's a lyric in it, it says, if asking to belong is too much, can I at least ask to begin? That's kind of what the lyric that the song name comes from is. So it's just saying like, I don't know if I can promise that I'm going to be okay with all of this stuff, but I can promise that I'm going to try to be. And like, that's going to have to be enough.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, that's really good. What other tracks? I mean, I know I was the one that brought that up, but what other songs kind of stick out to you in terms of the? Obviously, I'm sure it's the whole album for you, but what are the one or two other tracks that sort of represent you the best? Do you think, and where you're at and what you want to accomplish with this album?
Yeah, from, I guess including all of them, like not only the singles or non-singles. Apollo Song and Grown, track 10, track 11, both of which were singles, kind of feel like the wrap up of the project is like here's what we just went through, here's what we're feeling, here it is wrapped into like a clean storyline. They're both really, really special to me. It was also the first and last song that were written for the album. So I wrote Apollo's song first, and I wrote Grown last.
Yeah.
And sorry, the puppy is requesting to be brought back in, so you can hopefully
Is that Apollo?
cut that out.
Yeah.
No, it's the puppy. But yeah, I wrote. Come on, here you go. Go over there. Apollo's still asleep. Yeah, Apollo song is kind of this projection onto my dog of seeing her age and in turn realizing that I am also aging and that I will likely continue to age as my dog gets so old that she passes away. And when I got her, like, I didn't think that I would live longer than she did. I just didn't really plan to. And so that song is kind of like following that type of idea and how things change, and like my best friend is getting married soon, and your life is just suddenly this whole big thing that you just never really imagined would be real, and that's really, really cool, and it's also terrifying, and it's also beautiful, and everything can reach that point, but you have to stick around for it, and that's the hard part. Like, it's gonna get there, but sticking around through everything else to get to that point is really difficult, and like acknowledging that. And Grown is kind of sitting in with a lot of fear and anxiety and the feelings that I have about adulthood and myself and aging and like the crisis I have every year when I have a birthday. And that's the one that I feel like is most, like, I'm most connected to, like, in this exact moment, but it definitely can change, like, as time goes on. Too Hard is also really, really special to me. That's the one my little sister helped me write, or helped me finish it off. And that one started as, like, a complete stream of consciousness. Like, I'm not writing music and I need to force myself to write something. I'm going to play really simple chords and just, like, spit out what I'm feeling. And then it developed from that into something bigger and into, like, a really, I think probably the most personal song on the whole project, which says a lot considering the whole thing is really personal. But just about this fear of, like, being loved and in turn a fear of being known, both by yourself and by other people. So I think those are kind of the ones that I'm most attached to in this moment.
Okay. So you've alluded to it a few times, and I don't want to assume anything. And I'm trying to make the connection with what you said about you didn't think you'd outlive Apollo, and then, you know, possibly, I don't know, your time in Utah. But like, did you struggle with sort of, you know, was it suicide, or did you think that, you know, drugs were going to kill you? Like, what was the
just like
what was the challenge
all
there?
of the above. Like, it was going to be anything
Okay, yeah.
in my head, that just anything at all. I just didn't. I think there were just so many points in my life when I was younger that I was so unhappy, and I didn't really know why. Like, I couldn't pinpoint it. Like, nothing, at times, nothing was really wrong. I just felt a certain way. And before you have, like, the privilege to get into an office with a doctor who's kind and understanding and normal, because unfortunately that's not super common in my experience, and to have someone, like, understand and listen and help figure out what's going on, you just feel like some sort of alien. You know, like, when you're the only person in your immediate surrounding that's struggling with whatever that is, whether it's, like, addiction or like suicidal ideation or depression or anxiety or anything else, like mood swings. If nobody else around you is experiencing that to the same degree, and nobody is treating it as anything other than acting out, you just kind of feel insane. And I think that contributes a lot to making these, like, negative decisions to try to, like, fix it. You know, like, I'm like very, like, thankful and excited to live and be sober now. But for a long time, like, when I was younger, drugs were what kept me alive. You know, I don't think I would have stuck around if I didn't have something to make me feel okay, even though it then got to a point where it almost killed me later. And so the follow-up was, I'm lucky that I was able to get away from that and now live a full life without substances. But there's that double edge to everything, where sometimes the things that are really bad for you keep you going long enough to find what you needed that is going to be good for you, or to find the help that you needed to be okay.
Right. Did your challenges happen mostly before the pandemic,
Yeah, I was.
or was there overlap?
I mean, like, here and there, I feel like my primary issues, like that, before they were, when I felt really hopeless, like the point that I was struggling so much that there was absolutely no hope on the horizon at all, was like in my teenage years into like being like maybe 20. I got sober for the first time when I was like 2 months shy of 19. And it's been like in and out, and now I feel like I'm in a really like solid point of like almost 3 years of sobriety, again, which is wonderful. But it was definitely like primarily when I was younger. I think once I kind of was into a solid point of sobriety the first time around, I had regained a sort of like hope for living. Like my life was getting bigger, and I was like making friends and being around people who like wanted to be around me, and my family was excited to be around me, and my dog wanted to see me, and I was able to develop like genuine friendships with depth because I was a full person who was in front of someone and not some sort of like shell of something. And having like a relapse doesn't necessarily take that away or change it, rather than when you're constantly in that space and have never been outside of it. So I feel like I still struggle. It's not like any of this stuff is like you
Sure.
get better and it switches off, but it's a very different type of struggle because there's an awareness that all of it can be for something. Like I can think of a couple distinct moments that I've had where, mostly music related, that I'm just kind of like, oh, like all this hard stuff like is worth something because it might benefit someone else. And
Yeah, that's
having
good.
that awareness is what makes the struggle feel very different to me, rather than just kind of endless and hopeless. Being able to help someone.
So I think, I think you had said at one point that you wrote your first song, I think when you were 16, even before you knew how to play guitar. How did that process of, kind of leaving your interests as a hobby and as a job with the, you used to be a concert, photographer and all that, and then you kind of tilted towards to the music. It seems like, the struggles that you just articulated, how much did music play a role in either distracting you from some of that hardship and struggle? Did it play any role? I guess I don't want to make an assumption that it was like the savior or anything, but like how do you think you would have been the artist and musician that you are today, kind of without that struggle? And then did it help you kind of get out of that and become sober?
Yeah, I think that I don't think I would be the same musician that I am today without the stuff that I've gone through, because so much of what I write about is in that spirit of like kind of trying to reach people, and especially for me, like teenagers. Like people love to joke about like your fan base being like younger or whatever, but I really like cherish the fact that the fan base that I have are like younger, like, at some points,
Right.
like kids and teenagers, a lot of times like queer kids from like states where maybe they can't really be comfortable or out the same way that they would be somewhere else, and they see someone that is grown up compared to them and living a life that's like authentic, and they're just so excited about that because to them they see hope in it, and like that's so special and so cool, and not something that I ever thought about before I started making music. I don't think I like conceptualized that at all, as like a reality that could exist. And I think that I'd probably make very different music if I hadn't experienced what I did, but I also would be a vastly different person. And that's a weird thing to think about because, you want to be like, I'm not my experiences and I'm not like the things I've struggled with. And I think those things don't necessarily define you, but they do put you in a place to then use them for good if you want to, if you're able to. It would have helped me as like a 16, 15, 14-year-old to
Right.
see someone that felt tangible to me, that was like living authentically and is healthy and has been through something that I maybe either struggle with or something similar to, and isn't pretending like they're healed or fixed from it, but just is showing some sort of hope that it can get better. You know, like I needed that when I was a kid. And so I think the hope in putting yourself through the hard parts of sharing that is that you're going to be that for someone else who really needs it.
Yeah. Well, I talked to another musician a couple months ago, and I was asking her about, you know, because she came from a band in Europe. It was like the AC/DC of
Okay.
Women rock in Europe. It's this crazy band called Thunder Mother,
Okay.
of all things.
Cool.
But now she's in Nashville. She's Irish, and she's in Nashville. And I was asking her about like the difference between playing like big shows in Europe versus like the coffee shops, you know, or hotel lobbies in and around Nashville. And she's like, you know what, to the point earlier, it doesn't really matter. But she's like, if I could just reach one person
Yes.
to talk about like because she was very passionate about mental health, you know, and like self-care and all that. And she's like, you know, it's always worth it to just hear from one fan or talk to somebody after a show that said, you know, that song or your message or whatever that is, you know, really touched me. And she's like, that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
So like, you know, credit to you, like, you know, good things will happen based on the songs that you write, you know, and the music that you make. But I hope that you can reach as many people as you can, because like, to your point, those examples, people need authenticity, you know?
Yeah, people are looking for hope in everything. I think, especially like now, you know, the world is very bleak sometimes, or it
Yeah.
can be, and there's so many cool things, you know, like so many beautiful moments that you can experience, but you have to be not so blocked out to them. And I think that a lot of times when you are like really struggling with any sort of mental health issues, or maybe something with your family, or maybe you're going through something really difficult, there's kind of like a block that like exists, like a line that you see everything like tinted in a different way. And sometimes you just need someone to help get you out of it. I've needed it.
Yeah.
I've found it in music. I still do so much of the time. I'm such a like fan, you know, like as like of other musicians, and you know, like we'll drive like hours to a show because, you know, it's a solo tour from an artist from a band that I love, and it's like an 80 capacity room for someone who I've seen play to 2,000 people, and I'll drive like 2-3 hours, you know, like I still
Sure.
am like that, just to care so deeply about music that makes you feel something. And I think that's so special, and I just hope to do that for someone else.
No, that's great. All right, so last question, and I really appreciate your time. So that, you know, this podcast is based on, you know, a show that I love that you need to watch. Ted Lasso.
I will watch it.
But, you know, curiosity is a big part of it. So it seems like you've experienced a lot of things in your young life, but you've also, I don't know if you've seen the world other than Utah. Just kidding.
Surprisingly,
and, you know,
a handful,
spots,
yeah.
Some spots here and there. But what are you most curious about at this stage in your life?
That's a really good question. I think other people and stories, and learning more about people's relationships to the things that they care about, or the things that they don't care about. Just what gets people going and what keeps them running is something that I'm always learning more about and wanting to learn more about. And then I am big into travel and seeing places. I want to check off my last couple states in the U.S., and then I think I have 4 or 5 left, and then I want to start seeing other places as well. So just always curious about people and their perspectives and their experiences.
All right. Well, have you been to Georgia? You should come down to Georgia.
I've been very briefly. I've been through Atlanta very, very briefly, but Georgia is one of the states that I feel like I've spent like a very minimal amount of time in. Like I've been there, and I can be like, I've been to Georgia, but I want to like actually make it down to Georgia like properly, you know.
Yeah. No, the venue that you need to hit up is Eddie's Attic.
I've heard such a it's in Decatur. How do you pronounce that city?
Decatur.
I've heard
yeah.
really good things about that venue.
Yeah, I could totally see you play that. It's one of the best ones here. So speaking of playing, could you play a song or two?
Yeah, of course. Love to. Let me get this. I'll make sure it's still in tune. Also, this guitar is like 100 years old, so it definitely likes to go out of tune very often. Cool. Yeah, I can I'll play Grown, and then I can play Paula's song, if that is cool.
Okay, yeah,
Alright, let's
that's
do it.
perfect.
There's nothing I want more than to be someone else. My recurring wish on birthday candles. And the grass might not be greener, but I'm sure it's easier to take care of. There's nothing I fear more than growing into my skin. What if this is the best it gets? And the flowers, they might not be taller, but I'm sure they needed less to grow. I'm still scared of the dark, terrified of growing up. But I think I might be grown. I'm still scared of aging, terrified of clocks turning. But I think I might be grown. There's nothing I fear more than learning I found myself, and that this is all there is. My whole eternity searched for meaning. I was sure there must be something more than this. What if there isn't more than this? I'm still scared of the dark, terrified of growing up. But I think I might be grown. I'm still scared of aging, terrified of clocks turning. But I think I might be grown. I think I might be grown.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I bought this guitar because of this song. I was out in LA and I wrote this song. I had gone to like this guitar shop where this guy like modifies like vintage guitars. And I played this guitar and I was like obsessed with it, but I was like, I cannot buy a guitar right now. I'm about to drive like 45 hours home to New York. Like I can't do that. I have no space in my car. I've been living in it for 3 months. And I went back to where I was staying and ended up writing a Paula song that night. And it was named something different at the time. And in my head, it like was played on this guitar, like the way I remembered it sounding. And like I was playing it on the guitar that I had, and I was like, this just doesn't sound right. Like it doesn't sound like that. And I knew that when I wanted to record it eventually, that it would have to be on this guitar. And I was like, well, I guess I just have to go buy it. So I told myself that if the guitar store was open before I left LA the next morning, because I was about to drive the 48 hours back to New York, that I would go buy it. And then I checked their hours, and for some reason on Fridays they opened at 9 and not at noon. And I was like, I just gotta get it. I just gotta do it. So I just went, and then I bought this 100-year-old guitar, specifically because of Paula's song. So it's extra special for that reason.
That's awesome.
Dog meant to outlive me is starting to get old. My best friend's name will change soon floral blueprints on the floor, and I've thought a lot of leaving the only city I've ever known. Thought I clipped its wings, but somehow time's flown by, and I never saw myself walking down an aisle. Couldn't imagine what it looked like past 25. Dreams were a luxury that I couldn't afford, and now I'm living a future I never thought I'd have. The dog meant to outlive me is showing her white hair. My little brother's off to college. Someone had to please my parents, and I'm starting to worry that I'll never adapt to this. Thought I clipped its wings, but somehow time's flown by, and I never saw myself walking down an aisle. Couldn't imagine what it looked like past 25. Dreams were a luxury that I couldn't afford, and now I'm living a future I never thought I'd have. What do you do with a life you didn't plan for? Sucker punch straight into your wildest dreams, and worries too. Good things don't come unpunished. Think I might finally stop praying for relief, and I never saw myself walking down an aisle, but I'm starting to look pretty damn close to 25. Dreams were a luxury that I couldn't afford, and now I'm living a future I never thought I'd have.
So beautiful. Thank you, Mae.
You. Thank you for having me.
That guitar sounds. The guitar is perfect.
It's cool, right? It has a
Yeah.
rubber bridge on it. That's why it sounds weird. It's like plucky and weird. I'm so obsessed with it. I feel like it writes songs itself. Like anything you play on this guitar just sounds better.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, and have a great April, big April for you, and best to you in 2024.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's a cool conversation.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Mae.